I have so many reviews to catch up on, and that's where I am today. Hello everyone, my name is Yara, and today I'm going to be reviewing some of the books that I've read recently. Recently is always relative in these videos. Some of these books I read months ago, but I haven't reviewed them yet, so it's recent on this channel. I feel like this year I tended to read in like batches of genre. In the beginning of the year, it was heavy on the YA fantasy, and in this recent reads, a lot of it is romance and contemporary. So without further ado, let us begin. The first book I have today is A Witch's Guide to Magical Innkeeping by Sangu Mandanna. This is a cozy contemporary fantasy romance following a character named Sarah Swan, who at the age of 15 was a really promising witch prodigy, up until the moment that she decided to resurrect her dead great aunt. As punishment for using a forbidden spell, Sarah was essentially exiled from the witch community with most of her powers stripped away from her. Not all though, she had a kind of residual amount of magic that for the last 15 years she's been using to upkeep this magical inn with her great aunt that only appears on the road to those who most need it. She had almost given up on the hope that she could get her magic back one day until Luke, a magical historian from the Great Library, shows up at the inn's door with his younger sister, and Sarah realizes that he may just be the one who can help her. I had a lot of high expectations going into this because I really loved Sangu Mandanna's first book, The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches, and it did not disappoint. I just love the way that Sangu Mandanna writes cozy fantasy. It's the perfect mix of whimsy, of the absurd, while also being really grounded and earnest. Something I'm realizing that in both of her books that she does is really center the perspectives of those who kind of live at the outskirts of society, whether the magical one or the real one, and oftentimes both. In this book, she kind of leans into the idea of those who have taken the road less traveled, and the inn kind of functions as this physical manifestation of that road. We have people who kind of have nowhere else to go, who have been either rejected or just don't fit into the lives that they have led thus far. And so this inn provides a space where they can all connect and have that found family. What I found really interesting in this book was how much neurodivergence was centered in that conversation. Luke's younger sister is heavily autistic coded, and a big plot point in this book is that he's her caretaker and he kind of doesn't know where she should go. She is not fully accepted in the witch community because of her behavior. And a lot of the story is them realizing that the inn kind of provides the space where she can be her authentic self, where she doesn't have to be told to quiet down or that she's doing too much or that she's too weird. I just really love the way that this book handled that conversation around not fitting into this world and exploring this idea of how you can carve a place where everyone does fit in that you can be your authentic self. This is a romance, so I have to comment on that, and it was so cute in this book. I loved it. Again, the writing being so whimsical maybe added to that feeling, but in general, I just really loved the connection that we had between Sarah and Luke. Another thing that Sangu Mandanna really likes is generational trauma, and we really saw that in the ways in which Sarah and Luke connected because of how they were both raised. They were both kind of these parentified, somewhat neglected people who had a lot of responsibilities put on them at a young age. And I loved seeing them be able to open up with each other and be vulnerable about their past and also be a part of the healing process for them both. My one complaint about this book and what held it back from being a full 5 stars was that it was a little short. I think it definitely could have benefited from being a little longer. The whole third act in particular just felt very rushed. There was a lot of things emotionally that we had to get through, as well as plot-wise. There's kind of like even a final battle in this book, and the turnaround time just felt way too quick. I feel like we would have benefited from having some time to just breathe and let things happen. And while I love the way that she explored the main themes in this story, there were some things that were kind of mentioned offhand that seemed like maybe in a previous draft they played a bigger role than they ended up having in the final version. And it just seemed kind of odd because it felt like they were supposed to have a bit more weight to them than they had in the narrative. For example, Sarah talks about bonding with her friend over the fact that they are some of the only POC in their community and how they have experienced some instances of bigotry, but it's really kind of passively talked about and not really revisited later. And that's not to say that the entire book has to revolve around that, but just the way it was written felt like there was supposed to be something that we knew or that we saw that was taken out. And I feel like it didn't even need to be because, again, this book was really short. But anyway, with all that being said, this was delightful, it was funny, it was romantic, and I overall gave it 4.5 stars. The next book I have is Sweet Bean Paste by Durian Sukegawa, translated from Japanese by Alison Watts. This is another very wholesome and also very short book. So this is about a man named Sentaro who, for the last couple of years, has been working at this confectionery shop. He's been living his life pretty monotonously as an ex-convict and also now with a drinking problem. He believes that his dream of being an author is pretty much down the drain at this point. His life, though, takes an unexpected turn when an elderly disabled woman named Tokue comes to the confectionery shop asking for a job. While initially underestimating her abilities, she ends up making the best sweet bean paste that he's ever tasted. The two end up striking an unlikely friendship, and Sentaro grows to learn more and more about Tokue's mysterious past. So going into this book based on the cover, it kind of gave me those vibes of those books that you know are going to be wholesome, that are going to be feel good, a la Before the Coffee Gets Cold. I haven't read that, but that's what I assume that book is like. And this book definitely adhered to that and definitely has those vibes, but I ended up being so surprised at what this book was actually about. It ended up going in a direction that I never could have possibly imagined that this is what the topic would be about. Without giving too much away, this book ended up being about leprosy. The reason why it was so surprising for me is that leprosy just seemed like something of the past, of something that you only see in like a textbook or in historical or classical text referencing it. And that's more of a mark of my ignorance than anything else, but I ended up really appreciating how illuminating this book was. It talks a lot about the history of leprosy, specifically in Japan post-World War II, and everything they did to kind of ostracize these individuals. And I did also love what ended up being the core message of this book, which is that your value as a person in this society is not tied to your productivity, that it's not tied to your ability to work, and really promotes finding meaning in life through the small things like making sweet bean paste. I thought it was such a lovely and apt message, especially for our current day when we are so bogged down by capitalism. But the messaging also ends up kind of being this book's fatal flaw. At the end of the book, there is this passage that essentially narrates exactly what we're supposed to take away from the book, kind of explicitly. And the way that it was written kind of gave the vibe that this book was written as a vehicle to get this message across, as opposed to the message coming naturally out of the characters in the story itself, which is not inherently a bad thing. I think the story can kind of be viewed almost in the same way that a fable is, in that you're not really super going into the characters themselves, as opposed to taking the moral out of it. But I will say that having that passage at the end kind of took me out of the story. Like I said, the book was very short, so I feel like there definitely could have been time spent on developing the characters, really going into them. We really only have like 4 characters that we meet. And it's really interesting because despite being our main character, we don't actually learn a lot about Sentaro. Like those things I mentioned in the beginning about him being an ex-convict and having a drinking problem, they don't really go into it at all in the story. I ended up giving this book 3.5 stars. Like I said, it was very wholesome and I genuinely do love the message that it has. And I think if you read this book, it is going to be a net positive experience. I just feel like it didn't go all the way that it could have gone. I wish it had a little bit more depth and a little bit more creativity in storytelling. The next book I have is an adult romance called Love is a War Song by Danica Navera. This book was so fun. I had a grand old time. And the main reason I read it, or really the only reason that I read it, was that it was advertised to me as Hannah Montana the movie, but make it native. And that's exactly what it was. And it's exactly what it needed to be. The real synopsis is that this is about a pop star named Avery Fox who ends up getting canceled online after she has a culturally insensitive photo shoot and gets accusations of being a pretendian. In order to get out of the public eye, she decides to go to Oklahoma for the summer and live on her estranged grandmother's ranch. Now, Avery has never really been connected to her native heritage, and so she is excited to use this time to actually learn about her culture and also learn more about her family history. The only thing in her way is Lucas, who works at her grandmother's ranch and who hates everything that Avery represents. But when they find out that the ranch is at risk of shutting down, the two must put their differences aside and try to work together for a greater cause. Like I said, very much Hannah Montana the movie. You can change your hair, you can change your clothes, but you'll always find your way back home. Although in this book, she's not really going back home, but rather discovering it for the first time. And I thought that was a really lovely journey to witness. Kind of similar to A Witch's Guide to Magical Innkeeping, there is a cast of characters that she meets at the ranch as well as just in this community that I found really lovely and also really well developed for what their role is in the story. They felt like real people, which I really appreciated because I found found that in some of the romance that I've read, the authors sometimes struggle with depicting the community and the friendships outside of the main romantic development. And while it wasn't necessarily like a deep relationship with these outside people, it did feel like a community. And I also really appreciated how this book as a concept is really a subversion of stereotypical Western romance tropes where the indigenous characters, if present at all, are either just background characters, or they're aggressive antagonists, or they're fetishized love interests. And of course, part of that subversion is having this well-developed love interest in Lucas. I ended up really loving the romance. It's definitely a little tropey. It's that grumpy sunshine, only one bed, forced proximity, helping someone when they're injured, all of those scenes that you expect to find. But I can't lie, I was charmed. I enjoyed it. There's something about fish out of water narratives too that I also just find very endearing. What I did find kind of lacking in the book was an adequate exploration of the generational story that we have with Avery, her mother, and her grandmother. In particular, the reason why they are estranged, because it is kind of the emotional center of gravity in the story. And I just ended up feeling a little bit underwhelmed by both what we learn and also just how it was handled in the story. I almost wanted us to get a whole nother book of the mom's perspective of what happened, because I feel like everything having to do with that was a little bit glossed over. I also feel like Avery's relationship with her mom was also a little bit glossed over or not given the resolution that I maybe would have wanted. I guess the story wanted to have a more lighthearted tone, which I guess is fine, but I feel like it held it back because it was afraid to go kind of deep. But overall, I give it 4 stars. It was very enjoyable, it was very lovely, and also very quick. I listened to the majority of this book while being in standstill traffic in my car for 2 hours, and it was definitely a great source of entertainment during that time. On the topic of being afraid to go too deep, that definitely was not the case for this next book, which is 7 Days in June by Tia Williams. This is an adult contemporary romance following 2 writers, Shane and Ava, who once had a whirlwind week-long romance in high school, but something happened around that time that drove them apart and made them not speak for the next 10 or so years. But while they haven't been directly in contact, they have been secretly writing to and about each other through their own novels for the last decade. And when they reconnect at a literary event in Brooklyn, a lot of these pent-up emotions and unfinished business from the past come to the forefront. This is a book that I truly thought that I was going to love. I was told that it was going to be really emotional, that I would cry, that I would have this really beautiful and deep romance. And it definitely was not bad, but I was a little bit disappointed in the execution of the story. As I said in the beginning, this book is not afraid to go deep and cover some dark topics, so please be sure to check out the content warnings. It covers things like self-harm and suicidal ideation, abuse, drug use, as well as chronic pain and illness. And I actually really appreciated the way that this author handled these topics. I feel like when you are covering so many things, there's a fine line between going the route of tragedy porn versus going the route of toxic positivity and hope core. And I feel like the author towed that line very well, while not kind of going too far into to the point where the tone would just not match the genre, but also handling it with care and giving it the weight that it needs. There's definitely a lot of care put into these storylines and how that informs the characters and how they navigate their lives, even so many years away from the height of their trauma. Where I felt like the book fell was actually in the romance, both the past romance and the present day version. Perhaps it was doomed from the start because the concept of this book is that these 2 people fell in love over the course of 7 days while they were teenagers. I will say it's a testament to Tia Williams' writing that I was able to suspend my disbelief for it at all. I feel like perhaps if a weaker writer had done that, I would have been totally disengaged from that past storyline. But the way that she wrote it, you were able to understand why these emotions were so heightened and why these 2 people in their vulnerable states really connected with each other. But even accepting that as the premise, I really wanted them to have more time spent in the present day to really have them reconnect and develop their romance, because it almost seemed like they were able to kind of pick up where they left off nearly 15 years later. And to give credit where credit is due, the story does explore how they are different people now and how what they have gone through may have influenced how they go about their lives now and how that might pose as obstacles in their relationship. But again, I just needed more time. I needed more time for that turnaround and to really understand why they are good for each other and why they can form a relationship now. I've been kind of focusing on the darker and heavier topics of this book, but I do want to point out that this book is also very funny. There's a lot of more lighthearted moments in it, especially with the main character's daughter, Audrey. She is so funny. And there actually is a kind of sequel to this book, a YA romance about the main character's daughter, so I might check that one out later. Also similar to Love is a War Song, I really liked how the community was portrayed. Again, they just felt like real people, and I feel like that's so hard to do sometimes in romance. So overall, I ended up giving this 3 stars. I feel like it had a lot of good elements there and it had such high potential, but it didn't all work for me. The next book I have is I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Harpman. This has been an extremely popular book, especially on TikTok. I feel like I've seen it everywhere for the last couple of years. And so I went into this probably with a little bit too high of expectations. I was under the impression that it was going to change my life, so I was very curious. This is a speculative, post-apocalyptic dystopian novel following a group of 40 women who, for the last 15 years, have been trapped in an underground bunker, who do not remember what happened or the reason why they're in the bunker and only have vague memories of their life before. The main character is actually the only child among these women, and so she actually has never known a life outside of the bunker until one day something happens that changes the course of their lives forever. And that's all I can really say about the plot. This is the kind of book that you kind of just need to experience, kind of need to go in a little bit blind. I feel like a lot of its narrative effect is in that sense of mystery, but mostly a sense of dread as you are forced to proceed in the face of the unknown. It kind of reminded me of reading Piranesi by Susanna Clark, in which you're following a character who has no context for their surroundings and who is building a sense of their world brick by brick as they interpret their objective findings of their surroundings. It also kind of reminded me of watching Attack on Titan, very different tone, but yeah, just that sense of like dread and mystery of not knowing why anything is the way it is. This might be considered a spoiler depending on who you are, so proceed with your own risk, but I feel like I would have appreciated knowing this before going into the book, but I just want to say that you're not going to get a good amount of resolution to that mystery in this book. And the reason I say that I wish I knew that is because I feel like I spent so much time in that anticipation and just thinking that eventually we would get answers, and I was so clouded in that I feel like I missed what the book was actually trying to do. The purpose of this book was actually in this more philosophical and psychological exploration of what it means to survive a tragedy and what it means to live your life after your life has been so dramatically, radically changed. It explores questions of how can you construct a community when you are no longer bound by the same social constructs as you once were. What does that kind of community look like? What are the social roles? And also, where do people find meaning in life in a state of hopelessness? It was really interesting seeing how the main character's perspective differed from the other women because she has only known this life in the bunker. She's a lot younger than them, and so she pursues things with a lot more vigor and a lot more curiosity. Whereas the other woman actually withholds information from the main character because they don't see the need for it if they're no longer ever going to live in the same society that they once did. For example, they don't even give her a name, and so that's why I've been referring to her as just the main character. Something I do want to address is that the title of this book makes it seem like it will be talking more about feminism or just women's relationship to men, and I found that that's not really the case for this book. At the most, it's kind of exploring social roles when you're outside the traditional constructs of society. But on that note, I did want to point out that this book was published in the 90s and I think has only been recently translated, and that's why it's so popular. But the reason I point that out is because there are some parts of the book where I was like, this is definitely a little outdated, definitely leans into a little bit of gender essentialism. I wouldn't say it goes so far as to say it is gender essentialist, but some of the language that it uses, I was like, this is a little suspicious. It's not like a big part of the book, but there are some lines that kind of had me turn my head, specifically when it was equating womanhood to biological functions. So just be cognizant of that going into it. Overall, I gave this book 4 stars. It definitely was something that I think is worth reading, simply in the fact that it was nothing like I've ever read before. It left me feeling kind of hollow, kind of empty and unsatisfied, but in a way that was definitely intentional. It also was a book that I think can generate a lot of interesting discussion. I read this for a book club, and I feel like I gained a new appreciation for it after kind of talking through everything with other people. So this video is kind of getting a little bit long, so I'm going to end it here. I do have some other books that I do need to review, but I'll do that in a separate video. If you have read any of these books, please let me know your thoughts, or if you're now interested in reading these books, let me know that as well. If you like my content and you want to see more, please make sure to subscribe to my channel and also follow me on my other social media. I'm getting into TikTok now. I've been in a really heavy Percy Jackson phase, so that's kind of the focus there right now, but I do want to start making more just general book talk videos in general. With all that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you later. Bye!